Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the Muslim Matters podcast, where we discuss everything under the sun that affects Muslims, such as faith, local and global politics, social media, sex education, civil rights, and family matters, all coming from a traditional Orthodox perspective. Subscribe to our podcast and follow us online on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram on our handle, Muslim Matters, and check out our site daily at muslimmatters.org.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Matters podcast, Man2Man, where we bring guests to speak to us about different issues that are impacting our deen, our families, and our communities. And we benefit from the experiences and stories of Muslim men. These are fathers, husbands, brothers, sons, uncles, and friends. Our guest today is Brother Abdullah Zikria from Southern California. Welcome to the show, Abdullah.
Assalamu alaikum, guys. How's everything with you, man? Man, it's been such a long time since we've never done this little podcast before at all. But we haven't got in depth to talk about really anything. And I I appreciate you asking me to come on this podcast.
No, absolutely. And for our listeners, brothers and sisters, Abdullah is a father living in Southern California. He has two daughters. He's been in the United States since he was 3 years old. He is a respiratory therapist. He works in the community in Dawah, doing different types of relief work and philanthropy. He's very active with numerous organizations, including ICNA, the Islamic Circle of North America, ICNA Relief, the Al-Maghrib Institute, and others. He's also lived part of his life in Northern Virginia in the Alexandria area before relocating to where he presently lives in SoCal. Our topic today is going to be, it's an interesting topic I was talking to Abdullah about. Abdullah is from Afghanistan. His family still has family and friends there. And we're going to talk about how to talk to Muslim children, to Muslim young people about Afghanistan. This is a country that has an amazing history and culture and impact in Islamic history. And today, especially through Western lens and Western media and journalism, it's usually only brought up in a negative light, usually in a horrible context. And usually the stories that make the news about Afghanistan, especially to children that are growing up in the last 20 years, and even some adults, they've only known Afghanistan through negative stories and bad media. But before we get into that, I'm going to remind Abdullah, the first time I actually met Abdullah was in 2003 in New Jersey. Actually, it was at a hotel near the Newark airport. Me, Abdullah, one of our friends, Junaid Yusuf, we had flown into Newark, New Jersey with Sheikh Muhammad al-Sharif, rahimahullah. It was for an Al-Maghrib Institute training, one of the early trainings that Sheikh Muhammad used to deliver himself. We had just hired a new instructor at the time, Abdul Bari Yahya from the Seattle area. And of course, our listeners are probably very familiar with Sheikh Abdul Bari. And Abdullah was one of the close people in Sheikh Muhammad's inner circle. And he would come for many events, not just for promos or some of the classes, but he would also be a part of trainings or recordings or different things we would do. So Abdullah, again, welcome to the show. I wanted you to talk a little bit about your memories from that first time we met, and maybe specifically reflect a little bit about your relationship with Sheikh Muhammad as well.
So our relation, actually going into the event, is that I drove there, right? We drove there with my car. I had a BMW at the time.
And I didn't know you drove. All these years later, I didn't know that.
So I drove in there and I had a BMW, a young guy, souped up car, whatever I had done with the car, anyways. And so I rolled in with that car, and I think part of the discussion was like at that point was like, do we charge money or something like that for these classes, or how much we're going to charge and stuff. I think that's a side conversation you and Sheikh Muhammad were having at the time. And I think from what my recollection is that, we pulled up with these cars, and that was the first time that you had met us. And I was like, okay, well, are we talking about that everybody, we're going to charge a higher, increase the tuition for the classes in hopes of getting these type of cars, or getting these type of things. And so I think at least that's what I remember you mentioning. And it was just like our first, I think, interaction of like, who are these guys that we're working with here in the East Coast? right? So my relationship with Sheikh Mohammed grew actually from before Al Maghrib, right? So those who don't know, during in the 90s or 80s and 90s, a lot of the Muslim organizations and Talib al-Ilm and those type of things, they were in the United States. The hub was Northern Virginia, right? We had several mahads and several institutions that were teaching for Arabic for free. A lot of the ulama, they would fly into the area, being so close to Washington D.C. and the different embassies of different countries. So we had the luxury at the time of just really learning the religion for free from very, very prominent speakers. And Muhammad was trained to be part of that, that effort. It can be in College Park, Maryland, or Northern Virginia, different places. And so that's how I met Sheikh Muhammad. And he was giving some talks in Northern Virginia occasionally here and there, and our relationship with College Park was growing. Ideologies were very similar, and so I was just a wide-eyed, coming back to the Dean type of guy when we met and had to kind of enjoyed his talks and his perspectives on things. And from there, of course, 9/11 happened, and then things changed for the good, and the good as far as people started thinking differently about Islamic education. And of course, there's more horrors from had happened from that event throughout the United States for everybody who was impacted, right? So, but yeah, that kind of spawned the idea of having Al Maghrib, and it was in the works before. And I would joke around with Sheikh Mohammed that some of the aspects of Al Maghrib, as far as teaching it in college universities, was actually started by others in the Dawah. I know we had this session with Sheikh Zarabozo probably in 2000 or maybe 1999, and that was very eye-opening. College students got to see like an intensive class, and it's something that Muhammad had shared. And it was a joke that we used to say back and forth. But at the end of the day, the impact that Sheikh Muhammad, as we see now, he made, not only affected folks that were there from the beginning with him, but it affected people from all around the world, right? And it brought a lot of people together and inspired a lot of people. And it was a lot of self-reflection from him, for himself, a lot of training for, direction that he wanted to go personally, as far as his personality and outlook and things. But yeah, he when he first started on Maghrib, it did not start easy. It was very difficult. Even the old heads, their idea of teaching education Islamically, they never thought that somebody would actually pay for it in the United States. Their attempts of maybe having it free or low cost, in their opinion, of the old heads, and speaking of, their opinion was that they were barely making it, right? So they kind of shot down the idea, made it laugh. It was like a laugh for many people that Sheikh Mohammed was trying to approach and see if they can get some type of accreditation or something through them. But he stuck to his ways, and he saw a different vision on how people can learn, and inspired them.
No, a trailblazer for sure, rahimahullah. And I think one of the other amazing things about him, or his legacy, is how many friends and brothers he brought together. People like you and myself, we probably otherwise would not have met if it wasn't for some of that early work. So, no, definitely agree with some of the reflections and comments you shared. Thank you for that. Let me, Abdullah, with that, let me transition into today's show and the main purpose. Again, the topic is going to be around Afghanistan, hearing about it beyond what we get from headlines and kind of the more common talking points. So let me start with just a kind of a more simple question. You are living in Southern California with your family. Do you still have family and friends in Afghanistan today? And if you do, where? What part of the country?
So to backtrack a little bit, not born and raised in Afghanistan, right? And I came here at an early age. My family lineage of being from, the Shah's family at the time, or the kingship, plays a big role in my personality. It plays a big role in how I kind of see things, how I've been educated in knowing about Afghanistan. We had family members that were prime ministers of Afghanistan. We had family members that were diplomats to the United States, diplomats to France, diplomats to other parts of the country, other countries, and very educated, educated families, doctors, engineers, and so that that precipitated to us as far as what the family expected us to be, right? They expected us to be a people of faith. They expected us to be people of who knew their culture and were educated and knew about their culture. And so while we were here, we were still taught about Afghanistan, and we were taught from people who actually made decisions from a political standpoint, from like that impacted the country. And so our viewpoints are that's impacted some of our viewpoints. Most of my education for Afghanistan has been through them and through self-study, and it's come from a perspective of how my family was impacted by the changes that had come, and at the same time my faith, where it belongs, and thirdly from an unbiased perspective, in my opinion.
No, that's really helpful to know that background. In fact, I'm going to respond to that and go back even a little bit further, or quite further. Let's talk a little bit about Islam entering Afghanistan. Now, I think I was reading in preparation for this podcast with you that the rapid conversions or the mass conversions of Pashtuns, or in the modern day Afghanistan, they started likely around the 11th century under Mahmud Ghaznavi, and several of the military campaigns in that launched from North India. Do you know much about this history or of Islam entering Afghanistan, and kind of the first appearance, and then also more of the spread?
Sure. I mean, definitely. I mean, most Afghans consider themselves as Aryana, right? Coming from the Caucasus. And that's for to go further, right? So a lot of the influences usually came from the northwest from Central Asia. There are portions of south east by Indians and others that might have come through. But the key thing with regards to this mass conversion is that Pashtun or Afghan people, they are very independent thinkers, but yet very, very culturally attached. You know what I mean? And so many of the folks that tried to come and conquer Afghanistan, whether it's Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great and or the Persians, they had a difficulty because imposing your ideology on them, especially if it goes against your ideology, is very, very difficult. And you can hear it from the attestments from even Genghis Khan and even Alexander the Great. These people are different. There's something that's different about them. And when Islam came, a lot of the values of the Pashtun and the Muslim traders, business people that would come, the values were the same, right? About honor and respect and integrity and being very punctual. All these things have always been within the Pashtun ideology. And so when it's
I think one of those that's also well known is the word of a Pashtun. If they once they give their word, or they give an oath or a promise, it's known that they would not break it. They would do whatever they had to do to keep their word.
yeah, that word is tied to the blood.
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of how it rolls. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing, right? But it just goes to that dream level, which is like it's most of people have a hard time dealing with, right? And what that really means, that's where you get these terms of that we're talking about Afghanistan being the graveyard of empires. It goes back to that, where if the person is just so died hard.
Okay, let me ask you something, because I do want you to go into to this expression, the graveyard of empires. But before we get too deep into the discussion, if it's okay with you, for our listeners, I just wanted to address a couple of terms before we get too deep into. So, because there's a lot of fascinating questions that I think we want to get to and hear from you and learn from you. If I can just get some of those questions out, and if you can, just for our listeners, So historically, or actually today, when you're addressing somebody from Afghanistan, you'll hear people in the Western media, you'll see Afghan, Afghani, Pathan, Pashtun. Are the words all changeable? Are there, what is the proper term? Can you talk about these terms?
Yeah, so Afghan is a term that goes really with Pashtun. Okay, so even now, if we have many different ethnic groups in Afghanistan, right? At least four major ones, right? And even in Afghanistan, when they say the Afghan people, they mean the Pashtun. Okay, and so the majority of Afghanistan, 80% or even maybe more, are Pashtun. They're Afghan people. And so that's why the term is Afghanistan, because they are the majority. They have always been ruling. And many of the history that we're talking about of Afghanistan really comes to areas that the Pashtun have lived in and have really conquered. And so even in parts of what we call now Pakistan or the Pashtun Wadi or the Pashtunistan area, it comes back to Afghanistan. It's the original parts of Afghanistan, the historical parts of Afghanistan that through history has been isolated and stuff. But that's where it comes to. So the Afghan people, yes, there are people from different ethnicities, and there's no doubt we're not excluding them. But the term itself goes back to the Pashtun people.
Now, historically, is there overlap between calling it Afghanistan or saying Khorasan, or are these the exact same land? Is there some overlap? Is it different?
Definitely, there's an overlap. Khorasan, if you think from the prophetic, when the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that in the Hadith, right? And if you look at the map, it's solely in the heart of Afghanistan. Okay. Now Khorasan expanded to parts of like Bukhara and on these places which is considered in Iran, but that was after that period. And so there's a time where Khorasan was small, it expanded larger, and then it digressed back. But it's always been in the heart of Afghanistan, regionally. So yeah, so definitely it's interchangeable, and it goes back to some tribes of Khorasan that were dominant at the time.
Okay, that's very helpful. With that, I want to take you back. You were commenting on why Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires. Where does this expression come from? What does it mean?
Well, really, this expression came from the British, right? The term. And it's really been popularized since the British had failed to occupy Afghanistan. Of course, you know that they had made 3 attempts, and each time they failed. And now, some of those folks, traditionally have been talking about the Afghanistan being a graveyard because they lost, right? So if they lost, then that means definitely everybody else is going to lose as well, right? So, and by loss, I mean that they couldn't take control of the region. They couldn't have sustained influence on the society. They couldn't change their values to fit what we would call the Western values or the British values. And so they had to go with their tails between their legs and kind of leave the region without any influence, right? Unlike other places that might have been colonized, other continents that might be colonized, Afghanistan was not. And then this is where the term actually comes from. And so it just seems to stand true because for whatever reason, with the Russians coming in, they had to learn the hard lesson enough. Of course, our American counterparts as well, they kind of had to learn that in a difficult way. And when that's going to change, I don't know, but it doesn't seem it's going to change anytime soon. So, and it goes back to, again, keeping one's word, right? And so when the Afghans keep their word that they are going to be loyal to to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then and definitely that's going to be able to translate to withstanding any type of forced oppression, if you will, on them that's contrary to the Islamic values.
Yeah, no, definitely a very interesting history. And I think, like you said, goes back even way before the British. You'll find comments from Alexander about Afghanistan and as you mentioned earlier, Genghis Khan, and as well, it's there's such a rich history, just not just from the battles, but way beyond that.
In fact, if you think about the stories of Genghis Khan, when Genghis Khan used to conquer the areas, he's well known to have been bloodthirsty, right? He used to come in and just massacre cities. The first time that actually happened was in Afghanistan, because it was the first time that they implied not only did they kill the men, but they killed the children. And the reason why they did that is because in Afghanistan they knew that there was always going to be a resistance. That these children are going to come back. They're not here. They're going to come back in 20 years. We're going to have to deal with them again. And so since then, that the level of violence that Genghis Khan and his soldiers applied on the world came because they had to deal with Afghanistan and the people there. And so kind of gives you an idea of how they figured out what the problem was. And it's something more deeper than a normal response that people would give when the pressures come.
Yeah, no, and I think historically a lot of the conflicts and wars are obviously very important to the story of Afghanistan. But what I wanted to do for this particular podcast is to really benefit from you at a level that goes beyond just, and obviously the conquest and those things are very important, but beyond that. And I want to ask you if we can shift a little bit from some of the history, maybe come to the modern day. And I want to preface this discussion by for me, a lot of my extended family, all of my immediate family, my parents on both sides, my uncles and aunts, they've all been in the U.S. for, gosh, more than 40 years, 45 years now. But we do have extended family in Pakistan, and originally my grandparents were from Kashmir. So when I see Pakistan in the news a lot of times, I find it disappointing that usually the news will be negative. And I know that's true for many countries, especially with the Western media. So I can really sympathize. I can really relate to the subject of this podcast, which is, again, talking about Afghanistan beyond those really catchy headlines, those devastating headlines, those negatives. And I feel like I can relate to it, again, having extended family from Pakistan. I wanted to ask you, Abdullah, what are things, if you're just talking to our audience today, you're talking to people who don't know about Afghanistan beyond what they've read in a book or seen on the news, what would you want people to know about Afghanistan beyond things they might see on the nightly news or about September the 11th or whatever? What's something you would say to them about Afghanistan?
Afghanistan is rich in culture. It has, and it's very untouched. The land is untouched. Here's a caveat. Afghanistan has some of the most beautifulest lakes, mountains, animals. The modern world hasn't really touched and seen the beauty that Afghanistan holds. From the mountain peaks to rivers, through like clear rivers, lakes, pastures, the plains of Afghanistan, the layout, the people who are very common, very simple, hospitality that's amazing hospitality. You will find an Afghan who has nothing, right? Who maybe eats meat every 2 months, right? And if you and I were to visit, and for example, if you were to go and visit Afghanistan, that same person, undoubtedly, without a question, without even knowing of where you come from or why you're even here, right, will invite you to their home and give you that same meat first. It's just in their nature. It's in the nature of Afghans to be very hospitable and some of the kindest hearts you can ever meet come from these regions and the rural regions, places where in some major cities in Afghanistan they used to have different spices, salts and peppers and whatever. In the rural area, they don't even have that today, as far as being widely available, right? So their food, the taste of their food is different. The people are different, and so they kind of have to, and whatever is available to them, that's how they cook their food. But their hospitality is on a different level, and it's so genuine, right? And this is something that a lot of people who visited Afghanistan will see very easily. But those who haven't seen it and those who have been reporting on Afghanistan, they're not going to necessarily report those things at all. The relationship with their family, the relationship with their kids, very close tribes and very close villages that really watch each other's back. It's very, very unique to Afghanistan, and I encourage people to go visit. I mean, Afghanistan was known as a pathway for the Silk Road. Anything that used to go through from China to Arabia with silk, it used to go through Afghanistan. You can actually go to Afghanistan and go on that same road today. The way, in some ways, the way it used to be as well. The roads might not be as, definitely would be more rougher than other parts of the world. And so, yeah, you can still go there knowing that the original pathway for silk is still intact. You know what I mean?
So, Abdullah, let me ask you this. I know your family originally is from Kabul. If someone went to visit, they were like, okay, I'm going to take a couple weeks and go visit Afghanistan, see some of the history and soak up the culture. What are some of the cities you would advise them to visit, or even some of the rural areas? Like, hey, these are really some beautiful areas. These are or this is where the mountain peaks are. This is where would you tell them to go?
Really, all of Afghanistan, every single city has something to offer. Okay, from historical, like archaeological, discoveries within the 20 or 30 years that have been uncovered in regions such as Host, or if you want to go to a place that's very green and with the most beautiful flowers and the most great, wonderful weather, then you would go to places just east of Kabul, for example. And you have the Bamyan, you have the mountains of Bamyan, you have the Herat has beautiful rivers, and Mazar Sharif. All these major cities, all these major places are small cities that have a very beautiful rural area that people can go and visit. You'll find peaks, you'll find lakes in the middle of mountains, right? In certain parts of Afghanistan that haven't been touched, the water hasn't been used, and they're usually melted water from the snow peaks. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of places you can go in the border of Iran. There's beautiful streams and rivers that actually help the Iranian economy with their water supply. That's again untouched.
That's amazing. Now, Abdullah, let me ask you. I think probably some Muslims are guilty of this also, but especially the Western countries, Western media, even Western academics, they tend to stereotype a culture or a country and assume everybody's kind of exactly the same, or they have the same views, the same politics, same religious beliefs, whatever. Talk to me a little bit about diversity of the Afghani people in Afghanistan, whether it's how they view the role of religion in their lives, to how they view, could be family, could be other values. I'm sure, just I live here in Houston, Texas. We have a great Afghani community, thousands of Afghan families, great Afghani restaurants and businesses. And I know from my own friends that Afghanis are quite different, quite diverse. But I want to talk a little bit about that. And because if you were to look at the media, not that this is a bad thing at all, but if someone looks at the media, they would probably assume that all Afghans are very conservative, or maybe even they have very harsh views about certain things, or maybe they're all practicing Muslims, which of course we would hope for. But talk to me a little bit about the diversity and maybe the stereotypes.
Well, one of the things with regards to Afghanistan, like any other part of the world, we consist of different ethnic groups and different languages. There's two main languages: the Dari and the Pashto. Okay, Dari is basically the mother language of what we have modern day Farsi or Persian, right? So it's very old and it goes back to centuries, as far as we can think of. Same thing with the Pashtun language. They are distinctly different. Okay, for many years, Pashtuns and Dalis couldn't communicate as well, except for the Pashtun, which is the majority. They would actually learn to speak Dari. So you find even today, most Pashtun-speaking people speak Dari as well. Okay, and now you're starting to see more Dari people speaking Pashto, but it's not very common, right? And so, with regards to the differences, there's a great deal of differences between people and how they think and what their backgrounds are, even how they look, even how they eat, their cultures, the clothes they wear. It's very, very diverse. But with regards to the faith One thing that really distincts, I think, Afghanistan than a lot of places, yes, there is a conservative, valued society as far as social conservativity and as far as religious conservativity is there. But they're also very, very protective of their women. And the reason why I mentioned this portion is that it also is a cause for them to rebel. Yes, they rebel if you impose anti Islamic views, but they also rebel if you are, in their words, targeting their women. You want them to change, you want them to be different. It becomes, the stakes become much more higher when those two aspects of the culture is targeted or changed. And this happened in 1904 with the Habibiyat training or ideology that had come through my specific lineage. The kingship at the time decided that they wanted to become more modern. And one of the first things he did is he removed the hijab from his own wife, right? And this caused a huge problem for him. In fact, there was assassination attempts on him, on different things, because of his view on how he wanted to take Afghanistan to towards modernity. It really affects his ability because, again, unaware maybe, or maybe just making a bad decision, he decided to go after the two main things that the people were against, which is being anti-Islamic and being anti how they viewed the role of women in society should be played.
No, so I totally understand that, the protecting the women and the sisters, and also the fact that usually when the imperialism is coming in, it's going to try to target Muslim women and sisters. Let me ask you this. This may be a good place to transition. And I just want you to clarify whether these things are correct or not, or maybe if there's a nuance or more to it than we know. There is this notion that in Afghanistan, women cannot study, they cannot learn, or especially when it comes to quote unquote higher education. So let's say beyond middle school or high school. What is the truth about this? Is this in the rural areas? Is this a provincial thing? Is this not entirely true? Is there more to the story? This whole notion that there's an attack on or a prevention of women from learning certain type of things. I was wondering if you could share with us about that.
Many of the results, one of the things that we hear with regards to this specific topic is we have to understand that because there's diversity, a large level, a huge diversity in Afghanistan, we can't put all of Afghanistan in one bottle, right, or in one category. There are portions in the major cities such as Kabul, Herat, and Mazar Sharif, and even parts of Kandahar that view these roles to be different, right? So we need to make sure that that's also represented. That there's different views on how people have how the gender roles are distinguished. So, but with that being said, the majority of Afghanistan is rural areas. The majority of the population, the majority of the where people are coming from, the majority of even Afghanistan itself comes from the rural areas of Afghanistan, which is 80%. Now, with regards to the education system, a lot of what we are seeing today and in the past with regards to the education system in of itself is a result of the impacts of the West or modernized countries imposing their views on the world, right? And so I was suggesting in 1904, when this movement had started on educating people on the biology of men and women, on if in fact there is a creator, right? If in fact that there is like chemistry and history and all these different things that go against to the cultures of these people, right? There was automatically a sense of being forced to accept something different than what they're used to, right? People being taken advantage of. forcing them to believe something that maybe their forefathers did not believe, right, or did not accept. And so since that time, these rural areas have always been they've been very, what do you call it, untrusting of what government was going to ask them to do, right? Since 1904. And so the automatic response to foreigners coming and implementing their ideology has always been rejected because of the previous time where the people did not really trust what they were being taught, right? I hope I'm being articulate enough for people to understand.
No, I think it makes sense. And following up on the education topic, and I totally get what you're saying about mistrust and just having a general mistrust of authority or outside interferences. Would the same sort of logic or would the same sort of cultural context apply to the concept of the burqa? For example, I believe that the Taliban, after coming back into power last year, I don't know exactly when, but it was announced that the burqa was going to be mandatory, not which is beyond just hijab, but a full burqa. Again, something if you can comment on, is that also, is there a cultural context behind that? Is there a
So I'm not aware of this current Taliban's imposing of burqa on people. I don't think that's the case, but definitely on having a what we would call it niqab and stuff. So for people who don't understand, burqa is a full head to toe covering where a piece of cloth covers the entire body, and including there might be a net on the places where the eyes for people, for women can see, but it's a full body cover. The niqab is a little bit it's similar. However, it tends to be a little bit more revealing of the eyes, and people can see better and stuff. But it's a little bit different, but there are similarities, and also the quality of the fabrics as well, and also the color of the fabrics. Usually, you do not see burqas in white, for example, right? You don't see them in those type of colors. So they're usually in darker colors as well. Now, with respect to the Taliban, now we have to understand again, as when 80% of the country is based in rural areas, and a lot of those areas are going to have their own kind of traditions and their own cultures. So much of what we're talking about right now has to go back to like really who we're talking about. What much of the media is portraying is the lifestyle of people who lived in the major cities. Now, even in the major cities such as Kabul, you have 30%, 35% who are also very conservative, right? So if your areas of modernity or liberalism is only at 60% or 65% of the population are of that type, and the rural areas are completely 100% very conservative in their views, again, there's a misrepresentation, right? There's a representation that all people are thinking similarly to us, and that these people are coming in to apply their own views on the rest of the country. And so I'm not part of the Taliban. I don't have any affiliation with them. I do have many people in Afghanistan that live there and everything that you can talk to. But so a lot of my views is not coming pro one person, but just for us to understand who are they're dealing with and who the Americans had to deal with as well.
No, and I get that. And listen, on this show, mostly we're benefiting from your experiences, your comments, your stories as someone who is obviously you have family and friends from in Afghanistan, and you yourself, your family was from there. And not to say we're some sort of experts on the region, but I do know it was reported in even in the media that when the Taliban retook the country here just a year or two ago, that many of the people in Afghanistan in rural areas and even in the cities, they were okay with the Taliban to come back into power because they were so frustrated with the previous regime, and I think there was records of corruption and embezzling and inefficiency.
And that's that every occupation who's come. See, there's a lot of similarities. Now, if we're speaking about the occupation, there's a lot of similarities between how the Americans ran the show and how the Russians 20 years before had run the show, or for 10 to 12 years had run the show. And the Russians used the same tactics that the British and everybody else had used. And it ended up being the problem because the people did not see the benefits, but in their view, they saw more harm, right? So one of the things that Russians used to do, and this comes back to my ancestry or my relationship, is that they would teach Marxism to 5 and 6 year olds. They would teach communism and Marxism to 5 and 6 year olds, right? And so when you're coming from a rural area and your kids are being targeted, you're sending them to school and they're being taught Marxism, which is very contrary to, of course, Islam, right? And some of their values, you're automatically going to be cautious about the education system that this oppressor is going to bring. And the US did something very similar. They would come and what they're teaching, right, to kids, or they're not coming with, they're brashly trying to implement their views and ideologies on these people. And that became very hard for people to handle. And then you have the other side, which would take this culture and use it for their own benefit, therefore stealing from the people and making sure that only the rich are the ones that are surviving and then the poor are not. So, their approaches are very similar and their results ended up becoming very similar as well.
Yeah, no, very true. In fact, I was looking this up as you were talking. Right around when the Taliban did retake Afghanistan, you had multiple consulates of foreign countries and NGOs that operate in Afghanistan that were tweeting things about Pride Month and support for LGBTQ. And it's like, okay, if you're going into Afghanistan to quote unquote help the country, or you believe in education for girls, or whatever you're saying, that's one thing. But when you go to some of these NGO and these consulates' websites, the fact that they're so out of touch with the Afghani people that they're posting things like Happy Pride Month Afghanistan or Happy LGBT Day for Afghans, or it's literally like almost like either they're mocking the Afghani people or they're just so out of touch, or they're trying to, as you said, influence people or brainwash or stuff like that.
And that happens if we think about our own society, right? If we're thinking about what we here in the United States, the battles that we have with the culture changes, which the societal norms being in question, and this back and forth that we're having here in this country ourselves, right? And to think that people in Afghanistan don't see this, it's very. I think we're dumbing down the people. And again, when you have an ultra conservative society and they see that these certain people are coming in this country and they're implementing their laws on us, and then they see the celebrities and they see the struggles that we have within our own society, they assume that that's going to be coming to them as well.
Abdullah, let me ask you, and I know this could be a whole show in and of itself. We've heard so much in the last 20 years. I mean, gosh, you and me were probably just young men when it happened, but the whole September 11th and the war on terror, everyone's had something to say about it, books written. And again, I fully recognize Afghani people have diverse voices. They're not a monolith. But if you actually talk to family and friends in Afghanistan 20 years later, what do they feel about the aftermath of the war? And I'm specifically talking about kind of some of the US policies, kind of how it impacted Afghanistan, how it impacted Afghani people. I'm not talking about a position on necessarily on the actors or the people who were involved with it, but I'm talking about the aftermath and how it impacted the Afghani people.
I think what happened the same thing with when the Russians came, and that is utter disappointment. Utter disappointment of how they were treated, of how they were given promises, and of how there was originally going to be talks of their faith not being attacked. Whether you're liberal or conservative or in the middle in Afghanistan, they are very disappointed in how the outcome came. and the whole who were the people that were involved. We had warlords that were involved. They were robbing the country during the Russian times, and they were robbing the country in front of them with the United States. So the people were never represented, no matter how much pro-government of the previous government people talk about it. The people were not represented, and they were taking advantage at every single corner. We had NGOs that were making freeways and highways and spending millions of American dollars on it, only to have it blown up by the same NGO, just so they can get more money, so they can do more repairs over and over again, right? And of course, it was blamed by the other side. Now, so if there is one word, it's people who feel that they are completely, they were taken advantage of, and they're very disappointed with the outcomes in both ways. Now, of course, this type of energy was used by the Taliban to generate their own support for their own cause, but they were on point. And one thing that they did was they went to the people and told them, see, I told you, this is what's going to happen. This is how they're going to manipulate you. This is how they're going to, the rural people are never going to be represented. And so they take that to their advantage, just like anybody else would. And that's how they were successful at the end.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, so would you say that post September 11, the last 20 years of aftermath, again, being the feeling of being used, the feeling of maybe being taken advantage of, or best interest of Afghani people was not in mind, would you say that the perception of the West became even more negative than it was before September 11th?
When you fail at something, it's easy to just blame somebody else, right? And maybe even the initial intention was right? I mean, it was a response to, we were told that this is a response because they attacked us, right? It was never from the purest of intentions to see people prosper, right? And we spent a lot of money going to this country. Most of it was actually given back for our own military expenses there. But still, and this is from Islamic perspective, intentions are very important. And so I feel that the intentions were not pure. And so the results ended up being the way they are. And the people felt it, and the people knew about it, and the people had experienced it since the 1904, that outside ideologies coming to Afghanistan was never going to be for the better of the people, or it was not going to come from the people themselves, that it was going to be enforced on them. And so the messaging that all these occupiers had was the same, and they were done in the same strategy. And again, that's why it becomes the graveyard of the enemies, is because they use the same strategy to implement their own views.
No, thank you for that, Abdullah. I wanted to ask you, I know we're getting near our time. This has been an amazing discussion, by the way, very informative for me, and I'm sure for our listeners. I want to ask you two questions. One is, again, you look at Afghanistan and the history and the culture. You have great ulama from Afghanistan. You've had great warriors, poets, such figures in Muslim history and even, of course, in pre-Islamic history. Do you feel, and obviously there is disrespect, there is ridicule today, why do you feel that Afghanistan is so often attacked and criticized? Why do you feel there is this emphasis of portraying Afghanistan in a negative light? Now, I know it happens to many Muslim countries. Many Muslim countries are getting a bad rap in Western media. Other journalists have an agenda. But do you feel, or do you agree, or do you ever think there's even more of a focus on Afghanistan, and maybe even more of an effort to undermine and paint it in a negative light? And why do you think that is?
One of the things that Afghanistan does not have access to is the PR, right? Afghanistan has literally been bombed more than any other country in the world. And I would say bombed more than any other group of people since Adam. There hasn't been any bomb outside of the nuclear bomb that killed millions of people in Japan, but that was the only bomb that was not used in Afghanistan. If we think about what the last Trump, the mother of all bombs, okay, that was dropped on Afghanistan. So when we treat a country in that fashion, and the infrastructure in a country that has zero infrastructure, their abilities to represent themselves is very limited. And so they don't have the access to the media, they don't have the access for their own media, they don't have the ability to kind of articulate themselves in English language, even though they're making great efforts right now to be able to address that. They're still very behind in being able to defend themselves. And unfortunately, the relationship between the bully and the one being bullied is that usually the bully is going to have the popularity and it's going to have the resources to talk about the one being bullied, and this is no different. Afghanistan has always been the one that others want to bully around, and they want to push them around. And when it comes to the media and when it comes to publications, that's what you're going to see. It's always his story. It's usually the story of the one that's the loudest. And Afghan people are not loud people in nature. Naturally, we're not loud people. We're not going to boast and push our views on other people. But that sometimes, many times, is taken advantage of.
Now, Abdullah, here on this podcast on Muslim Matters Man2Man, we do cover topics that have problems or negative situations or things that may not be ideal. For example, the portrayal of Afghanistan and the bullying and some of the things you mentioned. But we try to leave our listeners with a positive at the end, with some sort of solution, with some sort of optimism. So I want to go back to the start of the show. You have two daughters, and being their father, you talk to them about many issues. So I want to ask you this last question. What everything you said, from glorious history to some of the modern challenges to some of the stigma, the ridicule, the Western coverage, what are some reasons that you have optimism around Afghanistan's future? Or if you were talking to your daughters and they see the negative press, they see the things in the media, they see the imagery and some of the comments, how would you talk to them for reasons as Muslims to have a positive outlook, to have optimism, to have hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the future of Afghanistan is going to be, inshallah, good and something that they can have a good hope for and a positive, inshallah, outlook?
One thing we have to always keep in mind is that if Afghanistan is allowed to develop themselves, is to choose their own direction on how modern they want to be, how religious they want to be, and outside influence is not, whether it's neighbors, next door neighbors, or from afar. If these people are allowed to make their own decisions without interference, Afghanistan will thrive. It always has. If you look at schools being developed, if you're talking about the hospitals being developed, if you're talking about having construction companies, prior to the Russian invasion, Afghanistan was just as modern. Certain parts of the country were just as modern as Pakistan, as Iran, as Tajikistan, as Kazakhstan, out of all than any out of their neighbors. Right? They had movie theater. They had all these different things that they had kind of developed already. Right? They had a huge companies for making clothes. Textile industry was large. It was great. The rugs, the carpets, all these different things came from Afghanistan, and they had high value and for the Afghan people. And Afghan people were never people who would beg for money, or you wouldn't have issues. People having catastrophic health issues, catastrophic food invulnerabilities. This came after the oppressors had come. This is after the results of 40 years of war, right? And so Afghanistan, I think, has a huge opportunity at this point to really take advantage of their future, because two major superpowers don't have the stomach anymore to deal with Afghanistan. And that's, if anybody wants to come to Afghanistan and impose rules, it costs a lot of money and it costs a lot of effort to do so. And so right now, it's a great opportunity for Afghans to really participate. There are different views in Afghanistan right now. They're not just one-sided, even today. People have been proclaiming and asking for women to be going back to school. Some of them are very angry, who ideally have been pro-Taliban, who are very unhappy with some of these decisions that were made. Some of it comes down to maybe that the movement unable to speak or really express their views on why they make certain decisions. But nonetheless, they have given an opportunity for people to come, speak, and talk, just be respectful, and to make sure and to understand that they've only been in power for the past year and a half. What happens from here on out, only God knows. We only hope and wish that not only for Afghanistan but the entire Ummah, that the people come closer to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and that we have positive development for the future of Afghanistan.
No, really, really appreciate that. So much more we could probably go into, but I'm going to leave it there right now. Thank you so much, Abdullah, for joining. Before you go, I wanted to say I know you're very active in different types of community work. We are less than a couple weeks now from Ramadan, about 10 days out, actually. Do you have at the moment, Abdullah, any project, anything you're working in that you'd like to plug? Our listeners will hear that and follow. Do you have anything going on you'd like to share?
Well, no, we have. I mean, alhamdulillah, I'm working with, I think, nonprofits, specifically the nonprofit I'm working today with, which is working for people here in the United States. Muslims in the United States have been here. We've been here for hundreds of years, right? If you're talking about Native American population being Muslim, from the Africans that were brought here, slaves being Muslim, and through immigration to the United States, Muslims have always been in the United States for a long time. And Muslims in different eras had contributed to society at high levels and impactful levels, especially from our African American community. Their ancestry, of course, you can read about yourself, but the Muslims that came through them basically made the backbone a lot of the things that we enjoy as Americans today. And you can read about Black history and the impacts of that in society. But today, we are in a new level of understanding. And organizations such as Economic Relief have really led the way in implementing the thought and ideas that as Muslims here living in the West, it's about time that we contribute to helping those who are suffering or going through adversity here in the United States. Whether there are U.S. citizens or immigrants or refugees, or if there's anybody that's low income or going through any type of adversity, the Muslims want to be there to help you out. We want to help you out. We want to get you out of the rut. We want to see if your future generations are not in the same situation, right? The future generations who are suffering get out of this system of poverty, right? To get out of the system of society forgetting about them. And so Economic Relief, with all their projects and dedication to making sure that all Americans in the United States are taken care of, is a big move for Muslims in general, right? We've spent millions of dollars on supportive services, from hunger prevention to disasters to counseling services, medical services, to giving women who are homeless or going to become homeless or who are domestic violence victims to make sure we give them support. These are a lot of projects that really have not been made as a place of contribution for a long time by Muslims. And so hopefully we can spawn more organizations to take a stronger look at helping those of our neighbors who are going through some struggle.
No, I agree. I'm a huge fan of ICNA. ICNA Houston and ICNA Relief in Houston also do great work. And I would say for all of our listeners listening, especially if you're in the U.S. and Canada, try to find your local ICNA chapter, get involved where you can. They do dawah work, they do classes focusing on knowledge, and of course they have a huge wing that focuses on relief work as well. So, jazakallah khair for sharing.
One of the things that with regards to dawah, and we didn't touch on that a little bit, is my experience of talking to non-Muslims about Islam on the streets, right? And we would talk about the impacts of giving giving the message of Islam, and at the same time giving them solutions on with their life, right? Being the best way of giving the message, right? And so, alhamdulillah, we have people out there that talk to people about Islam. But when you do this type of work, that's dawah on a different level, from a different angle. And if we combine the two, we can't be matched. We can't be defeated, because we're helping the people with their lives, and at the same time helping them out with their theology and their spiritual life as well.
Abdullah, I know we're at time today, but if you'd be interested, I'd love to at some point in the future have you back on, and maybe we can have a podcast where we focus more on some of the experiences and strategies and success stories around the dawah and some of the efforts you've done, inshallah.
Sure, absolutely, brother. I enjoy the time you've spent with me here and given me a platform to speak about Afghanistan. And there's so much more that could really be said that we didn't cover. But I hope that people get a better understanding a little bit. There are some books out there that people can read to educate themselves further. And there's also books by professors in Columbia University about the impacts of secularism in Muslim countries and these type of things. So I think people should really take an opportunity to read those and see how we can kind of move forward. And I really appreciate this platform that you've given me, Irtiza, and I hope to see you soon. And I wanted to thank everybody that's the listeners and tell them that if there's anything that I've said that has brought them any pain or hardship, that it's from my own weakness and from the shaitan. And if there's anything that I've said of benefit, then it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So please give my thanks for the entire team and for bringing this topic to light.
Jazakallah khair, Abdullah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Hey everyone, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us online on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram on our handle Muslim Matters. And check out our site daily at muslimmatters.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.